Well, I know that as someone who is very interested and keeps an eye on what's going on in animal welfare, not to mention my little true crime habit that I've talked about here on the show more than a few times, I am very interested and even get, angry when I hear about some of the crimes against animals and the disregard at times for animal life and the acknowledgement of their sentience in this world, which is why I'm so happy that tonight we have the Animal Legal Defense Fund here. So keep watching for more. And all you doggies, won't you walk with me? I'm the puppet dog. So tonight I have a very special guest, as I mentioned. I have Brian Hackett, Legislative Affairs Manager from the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and he has some very exciting updates for us in the world of animal protection and welfare, as well as information for you about how you can get involved. So I want to welcome you tonight, Brian.
Thank you, Ann. Glad to be here.
You're welcome. We're so happy to have you here tonight. Welcome to everybody in the chat. Hi, Goodnight Owl. Good to see you tonight. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. All right. And just to let everyone know who is in the chat, we will be taking questions. If they're pertinent to what we're talking about throughout, you can throw them in there. And if not, just wait till the end if you have something we haven't talked about that you think Brian might be able to answer for you. Also, if you do get something out of this show, please like, subscribe, hit that bell, share, and comment. I really do appreciate it more than you know. Good evening, Just Larry. It's good to see you here, somebody who is in the world of legislative affairs. So I'm excited that you're here. You might have some, things you might be gleaning from this that might apply to some of the work, I don't know, that maybe you've done in the past. So welcome. So Brian, we had your lovely colleague, Kathleen Schatzman, come on the show. It was a little over a year, I think, ago. And so there's been more going on. So I'm really happy that you're here to talk with us today. So if you could, please just, tell us a little bit about what is, just an overview, what is the Animal Legal Defense Fund and what do you do there?
Yeah, so the Animal Legal Defense Fund, we work to protect the lives of animals and advance their interests within our legal system. So whether it be high impact litigation cases where we are bringing suit against, say, for example, a roadside zoo that is not properly following regulations, or it's against a company that is trying to gag their employees from exposing animal cruelty, for example. On the legislative side, also within our legal system, we work to advance stronger laws for animals around the country. And we also, in that regard, work to defeat bad initiatives that could harm animals and set animals back. Additionally, we have a criminal justice program department, which works with prosecutors and trains law enforcement in animal cruelty law and prosecution. Mm-hmm. So we're really a comprehensive shop for all things legal, all things legislative that are working to advance the interests of animals in our legal system.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I go on your website and I'm just like, there's so many different things that this organization is working on. When the show's over or when you're watching the replay, be sure to go on there and just see it's overwhelming almost how many things need this kind of attention that are going on just in this country really alone, because you pretty much just do the United States, right?
We are nationwide in the U.S., correct?
Okay, yeah.
And our legislative affairs program, we monitor, track, and engage on hundreds of different pieces of legislation around the country in a given year. And also, our other teams work nationally as well where needed and where appropriate.
And so just out of curiosity, how did you end up working for the Animal Legal Defense Fund? How did you get into this?
Well, so I guess just a little bit on the personal side, I always had a keen sense for animals and an empathetic side for animals, for even going back to being a young child. And I was always interested in in animals. And I'm fast forwarding and condensing quite a lot, but the Reader's Digest version is something struck me when I was about 12 or 13, and I told my mom one day, Mom, I am not eating any more animals. And so that was probably a shock for my mother, because, oh my gosh, what am I going to feed this kid if he's not going to be eating the I guess the SAD diet, the standard American diet.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a rescue cat growing up as a kid, and I always wanted to do something with animals, but I didn't want to be a veterinarian. And, I just, until after college, did I realize that there are so many different ways that we all can be involved in helping animals. And professionally, before I was in the animal protection movement professionally, I was in the political consulting and campaign operative world. So a lot of the same dynamics in this line of work, working on legislative affairs. I work with elected officials. I look at legislation and policy. And instead of working on the political campaign side, I'm now working on the side for animals, but using those skills, for the betterment of animals. So I originally started working with the Humane Society of the United States, and I was the New Jersey State Director for quite some time. And then I transitioned over to the Animal Legal Defense Fund, looking to have a more national focus, being able to work more not just within New Jersey, but within more states in the context that ALDF does.
Yeah, very, very cool. Larry, I'm in the same boat as you, because I went to grad school for criminal justice, and my undergrad was political science, and then I ended up in the animal world and the social work world, so it all kind of goes together. It's, and as I was saying to Brian ahead of time, I said, just to let you know, I have a lot of people that came over here from the true crime world, because I think it's all just sort of united. I don't know, people who want justice for the innocent, and that includes animals. So Brian, let's just talk about, if you could tell us what's some upcoming legislation that Animal Legal Defense Fund is working on that's on the plate right now, something that you're focused on.
Wow, you have a few hours, Ann. So we will try to condense it a bit. But so ALDF, we have kind of three general categories where we engage. So one involves companion animals. Another area is on wildlife protection, and another area is on the farm animal cruelty. So on the companion animal side, one of our hallmark priority legislative initiatives is what's called the Courtroom Animal Advocate Program. Mm-hmm. And what a CAAP, what CAAP essentially does is it allows a court to appoint an animal advocate in the context of an animal cruelty case. So what happens is, so far, Connecticut and Maine are two states that already have these laws in effect. So they have active laws, active programs. In Connecticut, the University of Connecticut Law School helps facilitate and helps make their program in Connecticut a success. So that is a legislative initiative that we have pending bills in a number of states. The most active bills currently moving now are in New York and New Jersey. And so it's quite exciting. Yeah. In New Jersey, the legislation here recently passed the Assembly Judiciary Committee unanimously, and we're awaiting a floor vote in the Assembly on that bill in New Jersey. What's exciting about that is the bill in prior years has already passed the state Senate. So we've got a lot of support for this bill. And I don't like to, I've used the expression "count my chickens before they hatch," um, but I do think New Jersey is likely to be the next state where we pass a courtroom animal advocate program law, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, in New York State, we also have a pending bill in New York State as well. So that's exciting. Uh, on the companion animal side, we work also to support possession ban legislation. And so essentially what a possession ban means or does is post conviction for animal cruelty, an offender is not allowed to own or have contact with animals for a specified period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, of course, to protect animals and make sure they're not in harm's way for a potential reoffending
Yeah.
person. So in wildlife, one of the just to give
Can
an
I ask a
example.
quick question on that?
Yes.
Just sorry to interrupt you. In places where this has gone through, do they have any sort of rehabilitation for the person, or do they just have to wait a certain amount of time before they can get another animal?
It depends. I mean, some laws are structured where the individual is not allowed to own an animal for the period of their probationary period. Some it's a minimum of say 2 years or 3 years, or in other cases it's kind of an all of the above where the court has to have a minimum time for possession ban, but they can sentence the individual for a longer period of time to not have the animal. And as it relates to the courtroom animal advocate program, something to keep in mind, just along the lines of your question, is the courtroom animal advocate is there as a resource for the court and for both sides of the case to ensure that the interests of the animal are represented and spoken to and protected. So the courtroom animal advocate is not on the side of the prosecution. The individual is not on the side of the defense.
Okay.
They're there to bring the animal's interest directly to the court, and maybe they can assist the defense with getting the individual rehabilitation
Mm-hmm.
or some other type of non-incarceration help where appropriate. And so a courtroom animal advocate is a cost neutral benefit to the court system, and it's discretionary. In some cases the court may not want one or may not need one. In other cases it could be incredibly helpful. I mean, in the Michael Vick, the horrific Michael Vick dogfighting case, there was a special master in that case, and in that context, that special master kind of acted in the same capacity a CAAP advocate would,
Mm-hmm.
by representing the dogs and reporting on their condition, being a liaison between the court and the public in a high-profile case where people want answers and people want updates. So that legislation is a huge priority for ALDF.
Okay, very, very interesting. Yeah, because it would be nice to see if there was something in place, just so that they don't, okay, we waited a couple years or whatever, a year, and now we get another dog and do the same thing. But
Mm-hmm.
we definitely have some good questions and some people who are interested in finding out how they can help with specifically that bill. And yeah, Larry is in New York, and he jokes, I still have some political capital, so he wants to know how he can get involved. People are wondering how to get involved. Larry's particularly New York State, though.
Yes. So generally speaking, what I would advise is on our ALDF website at aldf.org, there are state-specific pages. So, for example, if you go to aldf.org/New Jersey, there's a New Jersey-specific page where we will have a list of active legislation that we're working on. There will be some action alerts at the bottom of the page. And also in New York or New Jersey and a number of other states, I could be emailed, directly for action in that state. So my ALDF email is my first initial last name at aldf.org. So that's bhackett BHACKETT @ALDF.org. And in New York, just specifically to Larry's question, really quick, we're looking at outreach to assembly members in the state to co-sponsor the bill and to, of course, support the bill getting a hearing in the Judiciary Committee. So that's the next important step in New York.
And that was, I'm just going to put that on the screen. It's
BHACKETT, bhackett@ALDF.org.
Okay, and I'm going to have that in the description too for anyone who's watching the replay or wants to go look at that after.
And if any of your viewers are interested in being engaged, you can email me directly. And if you're in a state that I do not cover for ALDF, I'm happy to refer you to one of my colleagues in my department who does cover your state, who'd be happy to speak with you.
Very, very cool. Thank you so much. Okay, so I cut you off. Okay, and also you do training too. You may have said that and I might have missed it, but you do training for lawyers and is it lawyers and like soon to be lawyers or something like that to actually take on these roles? They're volunteer positions, is that right? Or are they?
Yeah, so in the context of the Courtroom Animal Advocate Program laws, yes, ALDF will work with the state court system in helping maintain a list of volunteer attorneys and also the training of those individuals for how a CAAP program works.
Okay. Very cool. Makes me wish I'd gone to law school instead of...
Well, everybody thinks I'm a lawyer, but I'm not. So, that helps and hurts depending on the situation.
Right. You do kind of have that presence and I guess the title and everything, but okay, so I cut you off. So you were getting to some other things.
The wildlife category.
Yes, right.
Yeah, so wildlife is an area where so many of us as animal advocates, when we think about animal welfare, our minds kind of immediately jump to cats and dogs, and that's great. We all love cats and dogs, right? But wild animals really need our assistance. There are horrific roadside zoos where animals are kept in horrific conditions and exploited. There are animals used in circuses, which is just horrific. There are canned hunts. And what a canned hunt is essentially animals are born, bred, and kept in a small confined area where a rich hunter can just turn around and pay to shoot them. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. It's really kind of pathetic.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, it is.
And also are wildlife killing contests where there are specifically contests where a mass number of animals, maybe coyotes, maybe foxes, raccoons, squirrels, you name it, they're killed indiscriminately over the course of a few hours or a one-day contest, and people get guns or cash prizes or some other prize, and then they just throw the animals in the dumpster. It's pretty horrific. There have been numerous undercover investigations done of these killing contests. Just Google, Maryland, New Jersey, New York wildlife killing contest undercover investigation. You'll, if you can stomach seeing the video. So these are pretty horrific. And we're working to support legislation in a number of states to prohibit these wildlife killing contests. So that's one example. We're also working against bills in some states that would allow or expand the canned hunting practice. For one, in Wisconsin, we're working against a horrible bill in Wisconsin on the canned hunting. So wild animals wild animals belong in the wild, and that's the best case scenario for them. Of course, some wild animals need to be in a sanctuary for whatever reason. But roadside zoos and circuses, we should all do what we can to raise awareness that animals are not to be used for entertainment. Right. And one of the accomplishments that I'm most proud of having been able to lead and work on with a number of other, wonderful advocates and organizations is New Jersey, my home state, being the first state in the U.S. to comprehensively prohibit the use of animals in traveling shows and circuses. And then Hawaii followed. So there are some bills around the country pertaining to circus animals, and there's a federal legislation called the TEASPA, Traveling Exotic Animal Safety Protection Act, I believe is what that stands for, TEASPA, on the federal level to basically stop circus animal exploitation. So that's the wildlife category.
So how far off is that? So that's in process, the federal legislation. We're kind of hoping
Yeah,
that
so quite frankly, federal legislation, for a whole variety of reasons, is the hardest to really get passed. Often for reasons not involving the legislation itself, political dysfunction and divide and other things happening on the federal level. It's difficult to get any bill on anything passed federally, sadly, with the way the federal government works nowadays. But we are engaged on that level. But again, where people can be engaged is locally. It's in their own state, and it's also federally. There's always that option. But the closer you get to home, the bigger and better impact you could potentially have, right? Okay, I mean, if you live in your local town and you're friendly with your mayor or a town council person, town is a smaller area. You tend to know more people, and it's easier to be involved. And then you lift that up to the county level and then the state level. So as government gets farther away from the individual, and yes, Tip O'Neill, all politics is local for sure. But the farther that we get away from the individual, where that individual lives, the more diffuse our impact could potentially be.
Okay. Okay. So I guess I was just hoping that maybe the federal would get passed and then that would just end the whole deal. But,
it would in many cases, but the more that we, really conceptually, the more that individual states pass something, the stronger of an opportunity we have federally, because there's more buy-in on the state level to encourage those elected officials to move on the federal level. So, and the same goes for local efforts. Some states, like in New Jersey and Florida, individual municipalities can prohibit the sale of dogs from puppy mills. And so in New Jersey, we have 153 individual cities that have banned the sale of puppy mill animals. So that helps support our efforts on the state level in Trenton to pass a statewide bill. So the same concept for the number of U.S. states working on something can help translate to the federal level.
Right, okay. Somebody was asking about puppy mills. Yeah, that was pretty recent here, right? In New Jersey, the puppy mill. I remember that signing things like, didn't that just go through in the past couple of years? The puppy
There have
mill?
been a number of legislative efforts in New Jersey on pet stores and puppy mills. We got pretty far under the last governor, and then the bill was vetoed, so we had to go back to the drawing board. But in New York, there is a very active effort to pass the New York puppy mill pipeline bill. And that would be a tremendous, and ALDF is very involved in that coalition in New York, along with a number of other national and state-based organizations in New York. And on the puppy mill issue, and definitely that is one in our companion animal category where we work on a lot, in New York, we've had thus far California, Maryland, Maine, and Illinois have prohibited the retail sale of cats and dogs from puppy kitten mills. Okay. If New York becomes the next state, we're talking 75 or so retail stores that truck in insane amounts
Wow.
of puppies from puppy mills, horrific places where they will not be allowed to sell those animals anymore. So it's working on the supply side and it's working on the demand side to reduce puppy mill cruelty, and that's what we're looking at.
Okay. Yeah, so you're saying Goodnight Owl just comment. I think there's progress being made in the ban of puppy mills, but we have a long way to go. Missouri has been one of the worst states for illegal puppy mills. Don't know if that's still the case.
Missouri is a problem for sure.
Okay. And Larry was saying we should be able to do it in New York. We have a super majority in both houses and the governor. Good, good.
Yeah, the bill in New York passed the state Senate pretty overwhelmingly last year, and so that was really tremendous. But this year we have to get that vote in the Senate again, and we also have to move it in the New York Assembly as well. So we have until, I believe, the end of July to get it done this year. And I don't have any pertinent updates right now other than we're working on securing more assembly sponsors on that bill. That's very important in New York.
Just out of curiosity, do you run into issues with? I'm sure I know with the farming, there's issues. You run into problems with people because they're of the money involved in agriculture farming, but is it pretty, I mean, things like puppy mills and roadside zoos and, do you, at this point in time in 2022, is it sort of like this will all be going away? It's just the red tape of getting things through? Thank you, Larry. That would be great.
It's a good question. And Larry, I'll get you the bill numbers and some of our information on that bill that's up to date for this year if you email me. So that's a good question. And it's pretty hard to believe in some ways that in 2022, given the cornucopia of entertainment options that we have in our lives, in our country, that don't involve live animals, that there is still a need, that some feel that we need to exploit animals for our own entertainment. I think when we see companies like Ringling Brothers going out of business,
Right.
and we see states moving against circuses, and I think there's a tremendous amount of progress that's been made, and we've come a long way in working against these horrific enterprises, but sadly we're not quite at that light at the end of the tunnel yet. We still have cub petting nonsense in various states. We still have these roadside zoos where people can go and cuddle with a bear, and I mean just ridiculous just situations where people and their kids are in tremendous safety risk and danger because these are wild animals. It's not their fault. They're not supposed to be jumping through fiery hoops and
Right.
being, I mean, these are wild animals. And we see these videos online, or I saw a show, Vacations Gone Wild, and this monkey ended up attacking this guy that was it's a wild animal. Are you surprised?
Right.
At some point they're stressed, they don't want to be in chains, and they're going to attack you at some point.
Yeah.
These aren't pets, these aren't domesticated animals. So it's spreading awareness and educating and trying to address these things in a comprehensive way from different approaches, right?
Yeah.
People can go to a circus without live animal acts. There's human acrobatics, and there's magic, and there's so many ways that you can be entertained without exploiting animals.
Right. Yeah, what always gets me is then the animal ends up getting put down or what have you.
Of course.
If you want to call
right.
it that.
The animal always suffers for human stupidity.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Yep. That's what I was just saying. The animal always gets the death warrant when an unruly child or a Cretinous, adult jumps the fence. Yeah, absolutely. It's always ends up in the animals suffering. So I'm just curious. So we went from companion animals to wild animals, and then was the third, were you going to talk about
Farm
farming?
animals.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So farm animals, in sheer numbers, in the billions upon billions upon billions for farm animals that suffer the most in factory farms and cruel conditions for these animals. So one area where ALDF works is to prohibit cruel confinement of these animals.
Mm-hmm.
At the bare minimum, we can afford these animals some dignity of having just simple space to move around, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in Hawaii, there's a hen welfare bill where it would essentially require cage-free for the hens.
Mm-hmm.
In New Jersey, we have a very active bill that has tremendous support, which I too believe will get done this year,
Mm-hmm.
to ban the cruel confinement of pigs and veal calves
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
in these small crates. So that's just one area with farm animals where we're working to provide these animals a modicum of decency, which is what they deserve. We also fight what's known as Ag-Gag laws. And Ag-Gag is kind of essentially exactly what it says, is agricultural gagging of people like you and I who may expose cruelty happening in these slaughterhouses or large farms, what we call CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, where there's thousands of animals kept in just very tight, crammed, disgusting conditions. And so when people use their freedom of speech to say, hey, look at this horrible cruelty going on, some states want to try to criminalize that. And we just had a very exciting victory.
Mm-hmm.
If your viewers didn't see The Wire or follow ALDF via email, newsletter, or on social media, ALDF just won another lawsuit against the Iowa Ag-Gag legislation, which a second time a court struck down as totally unconstitutional. So the more that we fight Ag-Gag, the more that we can expose these cruelties in these environments where these animals are, and the more that we can fight for these animals. And when we've just come out of a worldwide pandemic, which in some parts of the world it's still happening, this COVID pandemic, it really highlights how animals and humans are so interconnected. You look at these mink fur farms in Denmark and in other countries where humans gave the mink COVID, yet they killed millions of mink.
It's terrible.
And so when these animals are kept in these horrific conditions, it's breeding grounds for zoonotic disease and antibiotic resistance. And, in 10, 15, 20 years, when our antibiotics don't work anymore, and it's because they've been indiscriminately used because 80% of farm animals have some type of illness that they're just, the antibiotics are literally poured all over them because these places are so disgusting. This has big impacts for human health.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. And it got really serious too with COVID. Things got worse, right? With I think I saw this on your website recently. It mentioned how the conditions got worse. There were less workers, and animals ended up suffering because of that. They ended up putting down, like, I hate the word sometimes, is killing all these animals because they couldn't take care of them. This overabundance of animals, right? It was something like along those lines with COVID, right?
I believe the term we had used was depopulation, which is even kind of too nice of a word. But yes, so when supply chains broke down and slaughterhouse workers got sick with COVID and there was just this overabundance of animals, they just killed them all. And in some pretty horrific ways were permitted. Some pigs were roasted to death by steaming. So essentially they put, got it so hot and sticky, they dehydrated and just died a miserable death. Some chickens being culled, and the mink and the fur farms being just suffocated, carbon dioxide gassed. Really horrible things affecting tens of millions of animals. And that's not including the billions and billions each year around the world that are used for food, that actually do make it to people's plates. So, we're not telling, we certainly don't, tell people to be vegan, but we do, ask that people be mindful of, where their food is coming from and how the food is processed. And there's certainly really bad ways that food can be processed, and there's much, more humane ways it can be processed.
And even some of the labeling is misleading, like free range doesn't necessarily mean, or is it, what is it, free? Now I'm getting confused as I'm sitting here thinking of it. There's a word for
cage free.
Cage free, right?
Cage free does not necessarily mean free range. So cage free, if you take an 8.5 by 11 just standard piece of printer paper, that's essentially the amount of space that an egg-laying hen or a broiler chicken has to move around. And so if you remove that cage, maybe they're just kept in a more confined, smaller area without a cage, but there's still 50 other birds sandwiched in, So yeah, there's, we call that humane washing, where something is portrayed to be humane, but perhaps it really isn't, and it's more of a marketing gimmick. So definitely kind of looking into where those terms come from and what the companies are really doing.
I'm not sure if this falls under, I guess, I'm kind of going backward to the wildlife, but some of the legal, I don't know if you were saying that those canned hunts, I know that you're trying to get legislation to stop them, but are they done under the rate? Are they done sort of like it's a crime, but we just don't have the legislation to, or we can't arrest people for it?
No, it depends state by state, but in many states around the country, canned hunts are totally legal. Okay. There are canned hunting farms in Texas where it's a big ranch and the animals are bred. Sometimes these are even threatened and endangered species, which we've called some of these to the carpet for this, potential violations of the Endangered Species Act, where, rich hunters can go and just have a quick, easy kill, and it's quite unsportsmanlike. There's not the ethical, fair chase. And, and I will say, to be fair, there are a lot of hunters who oppose these things. There are a lot of hunters who say canned hunting is absolutely pathetic and unethical and just lazy. You're just lazy. But the trophy hunting, canned hunting, I'm sure all of your viewers have probably heard about Cecil the lion, who was killed. Beautiful lion killed by this American trophy hunter, just for what, a picture and to put the trophy. So that type of, there are certainly distinctions in what types of hunting there are. There's the hunter there's fair chase, who goes into the woods and quickly shoots an animal and uses the animal for food and other, nothing goes to waste. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have, these trophy hunters and canned hunters who just, raise these animals and kill them easily for trophies. So really, disgusting. But again, I think hunting, you're seeing these just incredibly frustrating and tragic examples of some of this. But hunting overall, in this type of hunting, I think is really just decreasing. I mean, just because it's my home state, I happen to know these real granular statistics. But in New Jersey, out of over 9 million people, what percentage of the population, and just take a quick guess, what percentage of the population in New Jersey do you think hunts?
That's the thing. It actually, I'm not going to get this right at all, because to me, where I live, I can't imagine hunting to begin with, because it's like too suburban, urban. Like, I'm up in the Morristown area. It's not really. But I was, one day around Thanksgiving, I was walking in the area, and in the complex where I live, I'm walking my dogs, and this guy behind a dumpster is like doing something to a bird. Like, I see him like doing something, like, and I'm like, what's going on? Like, I don't know what's going on. And I'm like, is this what is happening? Like, because there is a little bit of a tiny wooded area here nearby, and I'm like, did he go in there and kill a bird? So I went to my husband. I'm like, there's a guy who's out there, like. He's like, no, he probably went hunting and brought it back, and he's like, doing what, I don't know, they do to it.
Like defeathering it?
Yeah, my dogs were going crazy. I mean, they were like, German Shepherd, like pulling me all over the place. But I don't know, because I can't, a million? I don't know. Like, is that even
so
500,000?
Out of 9 million people, less than 1/2 of 1% holds a hunting license.
Okay. Okay.
So literally more than 99.5% of the state of New Jersey either does not hunt or doesn't approve of hunting.
Okay. That actually doesn't surprise me that much. Yeah.
Yet, these state agencies are so outdated in their constitution. And, for example, the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife, the Fish and Game Council, I mean, there are statutes from the 1950s that constitute these bodies. And
Wow.
You look at it, and the only people allowed to be on these bodies are hunters. So you have entire state agencies of government funded by all of our tax dollars, just predominantly biased towards supporting hunting, when 99.5% of the state doesn't hunt.
Yeah, that makes no sense at all.
It's really unbelievable.
Yeah. Sorry, my cat's like about to eat something she shouldn't. So
my office door is closed, so the cats.
That's what I should.
It's like the barbarians are on the edges of the Roman Empire. The cats are at the gates outside the door.
I had to reset up this whole background for this cat who's now over there across the room. I can't get to her, trying to play with plastic. She hasn't gotten to eating it. She's got her head. She's safe. I'm like watching her out of.
I thought you'd have a cat perfectly perched on that little round shelf behind you, just for your frame, but
that's what she's supposed to do. That's what we went and changed my whole
Get some
studio.
catnip on there.
Yeah, that's what I said to my husband before. I'm like, maybe we should just attract her so she'll sit on this thing, because she, honestly, since I set this up, now she won't sit here, even though every time before it and she's enormous. She's 11 pounds.
Oh, there she is.
There she is. Okay. So she can do damage. So the idea was like, instead of eating my wires and knocking the camera over in the middle of the show, I would set her up. But now, of course, anyway. So Yeah, I mean, it does. Being in New Jersey, it doesn't surprise me that there, and just, I only know, except for that guy, I only know like of somebody who hunts. It's just not something that you hear too many people, at least where I am too, like I'm in northern New Jersey. But yeah, that's a lot to work with if everybody there is, on that team they're all hunters. So I'm curious, are there any, you know, laws or, legislation that you just really feel extremely passionate about? Like you've been working at this and it's, something that you're really passionate about seeing go through at this time.
That's a difficult question.
Sure, everything, right?
I mean, I am passionate about all of this legislation, and so many animals and so many of these categories need help, and whether it be the companion animals, it be wildlife, it be the farm animals. I guess personally, I have a little bit more of a gravitation towards the farm animal issues. I mean, I work a lot on the wildlife and the hunting stuff, which just boils my blood. But the farm animals, I mean, I really encourage your viewers. There are farm animal sanctuaries probably in every state. I don't know specific ones in every state, but I've been to a few different farm sanctuaries, and you realize these animals are, you use the word in the beginning of your show, sentient, but not using that word. I mean, these are living, breathing, emotional beings. I mean, to see this dairy cow who was rescued, and to see this pig who was rescued, and a goat, and I mean, I hung out for like 10 minutes with this beautiful turkey at this farm sanctuary, and I noticed the turkeys. Oh boy, I should know.
It's like beak
I
or
don't know
whatever. I actually don't know if that's
the,
called a beak either.
well,
Like
not the
nose.
beak, but like the skin that kind of is around the.
Oh,
So
okay.
the skin was turning. I think it was turning like a blue color. And I looked at the owner of the sanctuary. I said, "Turkey's face is changing colors." And he said, "Yeah, when they turn that color, they're relaxed and they're happy." And
Oh, wow.
this beautiful turkey was just, and I'm petting this turkey, and it's really amazing when you can look into the eyes of the animal and you say, you're no different than my cat, my dog.
Yeah.
You're no different than my best friend I went to college with. You just happen to have feathers and you live on a farm, really. I mean, it just,
Right. Well, they have
um,
families and
yeah, I mean, they have
parents
feelings,
and
and
yeah.
they have, you know, and so I do particularly have a gravitation towards those animals, just because the sheer number of those animals that
It's a
are
snood,
affected.
apparently.
Yes, thank you. Snood.
Yeah, I can see how, so as part of your job, do you go and meet these animals in person or?
Well, the only animals I typically deal with in a day are politicians. So I'm a political animal in that sense. And working in my job, legislation and policy, and I'm working with more so people every day.
Mhm.
But no, I mean, if we have partners in certain places that help support our legislation. For example, one of our states where we have a bill pending, that's the sanctuary I went to. They're very involved supporting our work, and they just have a beautiful farm sanctuary. So we had an event there to support, the legislation. So that's when I have the privilege and the opportunity to really engage directly with animals like that. And in my prior role, we worked closely with animal shelters. So that's that's kind of how I went from 1 cat to 2 cats to 4 cats to 6 cats, and I'll just stop it there. And kept adding them on.
Something that I would love to see happen, but I'm not sure if in what form it needs to happen, but is there, I've seen where there's a push to try to, and this has only happened, I think, in Oregon, I want to say. I did a show about this a few shows back about like giving animals the title of sentient beings. How important do you think that is?
So I think any opportunity we have to recognize that animals are living, breathing, feeling, thinking beings. They're not humans, of course, but humans are mammals, and many of these animals are also mammals. So we're in some levels very similar. I think that's a benefit to the animals, because in so many places the legal status of animals is nothing more than property.
Mm-hmm.
So legally, an animal is, sadly, you have a shovel in your shed, and property is property, right?
Right.
But the idea that we have so many animal cruelty laws about animal cruelty is a statement by and of itself that animals are not just property, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we have whole statutes dealing with animal cruelty saying that maiming and torturing and mistreating and starving animals is a criminal offense, and you can't do certain things. It's an acknowledgement that animals are living, breathing, feeling, emotional beings, right? And so the more that we can strengthen those laws, the more that we can bring awareness to the fact that these animals deserve a higher level of protection. And again, humans are humans and animals are animals, but animals deserve much more protections than they're getting in many places. And one of the fundamental reasons they deserve those better protections is because they too bleed, they too feel pain, they too think, they too have emotions, they too have connections to their children and their familial structures within there. So that is a fundamental important fact to recognize anytime we can.
And it actually brings me to this post I did today about Desmond.
Yes.
Let me see if I can. We look a little weird. Whoops. Get you back there. So my question in my post to people was, what happens if a dog is beaten to death like Desmond below, but prosecutors elect not to bring charges? Can the dog file a suit on their own behalf? Is there anyone else who is able to pursue justice under the criminal law system? So we know the answer. We've kind of touched on it with the court appointed, but let you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So there is a case known as Justice the Horse, and I believe it's out of Oregon, that your viewers can definitely Google ALDF Justice the Horse. And I don't cover Oregon, so I'm not an expert on this particular piece of legislation, this policy. But as I understand it, there was able to be a lawsuit on behalf of the horse, and Justice the Horse is the horse in that case. So definitely take a look at that. Now, the Courtroom Animal Advocate Program laws, it's a distinction in that the animals are not getting a lawyer in Courtroom Animal Advocate programs. They're not getting a lawyer in the way that you or I would get a lawyer in a case.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a court-appointed kind of special advocate where the prosecution has an obligation to the state.
Right.
The prosecution doesn't necessarily have an obligation to represent an animal cruelty case. They're representing the state's case against a violator for maybe maybe all sorts of different violations, not just an animal cruelty law violation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the defense, of course, is representing the defendant and is challenging the charges. So there's nobody to specifically speak to the interest and status of those animals that were the victims in that case, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the courtroom animal advocate is focused on those victims in that case. And in animal cruelty cases, of course, those are the animals.
Okay. And Desmond was the dog that kind of inspired the state of Connecticut start the courtroom
Yes.
advocate. Okay.
Yes.
Or Desmond.
ALDF, we just released a couple weeks ago, we did a national release of a really powerful video that was narrated by Angelica Houston about the Courtroom Animal Advocate Program effort.
Okay.
And Desmond is featured in that video.
Oh, okay.
And again, just you can Google ALDF Courtroom Animal Advocate Programs, and the page on that issue will come up and you can see the video there.
Okay. Your website is aldf.org, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And I'll have that in the description to everybody for the replay and anybody that wants to go there afterward. And then how else can people get involved? I know I get a lot of your emails and things, and that's very helpful. So if you could tell people what they can do to get involved.
So specifically for ALDF, there's a few ways to kind of stay engaged, stay informed, and then get information. So definitely, we have Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of those platforms. So be sure to, like and follow, and I don't personally do all the tweeting, and I'm a geriatric millennial, so I'm just kind of. But if anybody are on those platforms, definitely follow ALDF there, and definitely sign up for email updates, because the organization sends general emails about general issues, general updates. But then if you put in where you live, like your state, you'll get state-specific alerts or emails about things going on in your state when appropriate. So that's important. On our website, there's a lot of really amazing resources. There are, pre-recorded webinars about how to lobby and about different issues and different topics. I just did one this week on our quarterly legislative update for this point in the year already, and we covered a lot of different issues and a brief lobby 101. So you can catch that information. There's the state rankings report, the 2021 ALDF state rankings report on our website, where it's an interactive map, and you can look up your own state, you can look it up by issue area and see where your state ranks.
Yeah.
And you'll see areas where there's good things happening in your state. Hopefully you're not in the red bottom tier, but in all instances, there's usually some area where there's room for improvement, whether you're number 1 or you're number 50 in rankings. So that's a very informative tool. We also just recently published a model legislation guide. So there are draft terms and definitions and actual language that you can pull for all these different animal protection initiatives. So if you're friends with your mayor and you want to go to your mayor and say, hey, pass a resolution or an ordinance about this animal issue, there's language there that you can present to him and say, here's model language.
That's great.
So that's a great resource. And of course, uh, for folks who want to be involved within their own state on legislative matters, we have our legislative affairs team, and we all cover different states. So wherever your state is, if there's an ordinance you want to work on, if there's a legislative effort, either offensively or defensively, that we're working on, or you go to your state rankings report and you see that maybe your state doesn't have mandatory cross-reporting of animal cruelty yet, and you want to talk to someone about what are the ways that we can try to work on that particular issue, we can be engaged. So
Oh gosh.
we're
Yeah.
our particular team is a small but mighty team, and we do a lot of work, and we try our best to work with everybody who wants to be involved.
Yeah, it's amazing. If you go to their website, it's at aldf.org. There is the amount of work that they're doing, the amount of legislation that's out there. It's incredible. There's something for everyone in your state. And you know what I wish I'd gotten to? I know I promised to let you go. It's been an hour, but you guys are always welcome back. But I know I wanted to just, if I could real quick ask, is there the topic of animals who are in homes with domestic violence, and is there anything going on with that in any state that's really, I know that especially with our audience, we have people who are very interested in those types of situations that are going on. There's a few big cases right now, but what happens to the animal, and are animals considered family members? Are they victims of domestic violence? And anything going on with that topic right now?
Yeah, so a couple points on that are, I think, not directly domestic violence, but obviously very much are involved with that issue. So we support laws, pet custody laws. So for example, the state of New York late last year, passed a law requiring animals be considered in separation and divorce proceedings. So, again, legally, animals are property. And so in a divorce, the couple's property has to be split up and divvied out, right? So those laws require courts to really take into account the interests of the animal in terms of those separation proceedings. So that is kind of a domestic, related issue that we there are good laws and efforts to try to think about the animal in those difficult situations. And another one is, that I just made reference to, is cross-reporting of animal cruelty. So, in some states, there's just veterinary reporting, where it requires a veterinarian to make a report to authorities if they suspect there's been, criminal animal cruelty with an animal that they see. And those are good laws. But there are, in other states, laws that are kind of what I call an omnibus cross-reporting, where it requires cross-reporting for child protective services employees, for elder care situations. So if anyone in the capacity of their job as a social worker or an elder care worker or any of those capacities sees a situation where animals are in a very challenging situation, it would be required to report those situations. And it's not always punitive, right? It doesn't have to be, we're going to report this person and throw them in jail. It's maybe it's a problem of resources.
Yeah.
And an individual can't afford to help their animal with veterinary care.
Right.
Well, then let's help that person get the animal veterinary care. Maybe there's a charitable program or some local organization that can help that person get the animal the care and other sustenance the animal needs. So those
Right.
reporting laws are important in challenging situations, as well as the pet custody considerations in domestic disputes. So
Mm-hmm.
those are two areas just specifically kind of touching upon domestic situations where the interest of those animals is really important to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. When I used to do in-home work as a social worker, that was always it wasn't like an official thing, but it just became part of what we did. You know, if you cared, you were a social worker who had a heart with animals. The animals got help too. I mean, that was just sort of trying to get people resources, wrap around resources. So it's good to hear that it's become more official since many years ago when I was doing that kind of work, or that they're trying to make it more official, more across the board. So.
We're trying to. I remember a few years ago, I got a call from a principal in a school, and the principal was asking me for some guidance because there was a young girl coming into the school and just really just concerning things were being displayed by the girl in terms of her health and her appearance and bites and things like this. And
Mm.
it ended up she was coming from an animal hoarding situation.
Oh, wow.
So in that, and the principal said to me, we're getting the girl some help, but what about all the animals there? And I mean that the house was a horror house with rabbits and cats and dog. I mean it was a nightmare. And so how much do you really help that young girl if that's the environment she's going back to every day after school?
Yeah.
So not only does she need help, but her family in the hoarding case and those animals need help, because that's not a healthy situation for anybody.
Right. Right. Yeah, it has to be holistic and everything has to be taken into consideration to really make a change. And let me, I see a comment here. I'll have to talk to you afterward. SK, maybe leave something in the comment. I don't know exactly what to say about that, but we do need to make sure things are okay there. So I don't want to keep you because I know we've taken up a lot of your time, and it's just there's so much you guys are doing, and many of us are so appreciative. So many people just saying thank you for what you do and for what Animal Legal Defense Fund is doing. Yes, wanting Brian to come back and keep us updated with things. It surely would be nice. Yes, absolutely.
I would be more than happy to come back. There is so much happening all the time, and there have probably been updates just in the hour that I've been on with you. So I'm happy to come back anytime. It's been a real pleasure, and
Wonderful.
anytime.
Wonderful. Absolutely. Would love to have you. And if I could keep you for 1 minute after we end, I would appreciate it. I just want to get a photo, but thank you everybody who's been here tonight, and have a wonderful weekend coming up. And if you're watching the replay or you're coming back and just want to at the end of this leave a comment, let us know.
Happy St. Patty's Day to everybody.
Oh yes, actually I forgot about that. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. Thank you, and have a wonderful evening.